Hi, thanks for tuning back into our Facebook Lives. We're here today with our copywriter Meredith, and we're going to be talking a little bit about her latest blog post on copywriting, which is kind of a broad subject, and it's a little bit, I guess, basic compared to some other topics we cover here, but it's important for brands and it adds value when you have good copywriting and good content. So, yes, it's very important. But Meredith, do you want to tell us a little bit about your background and kind of how you got into copywriting?
Sure. I went to school at the University of Texas in Austin, and I studied communications and English.
Nice.
And I actually took a class there that helped everyone get a portfolio together. So that was super helpful to be able to move to New York City, and I got a job at Saatchi & Saatchi and worked there for a few years, and then I worked at McCann Erickson for a few years, and since then I've worked with a lot of big companies and also a lot of startups.
Right.
So the industry has changed a lot, but it's been a very fun thing to be a part of, and I've really enjoyed it. So
that's great. And just for our viewers that know, that those are really big advertising agencies that she worked for, so she's very experienced. But I guess like kind of to start out our conversation here, what would you think would be the first step that when somebody goes to write, say like a blog post or something, what should they be thinking about when they begin?
Well, one of the first things to think about is who your audience is. So the more specific you can get, the better. Are you writing to a wide audience, or do you have a specific person in a specific age range with a specific job that would be interested in whatever you're writing about? And I would just try to really define my audience and think about what they're thinking about while they're going to be hearing about your product. So anticipate their needs and their wants, and think about that.
Right. Yes, it's very important to think about your audience, I think, and that changes a lot. Some people don't really realize that.
I was kind of trying to think of some examples of advertising where I thought, who's the audience? And I thought of the Discover commercials, where it's they say, we treat you like you treat you.
Right.
And they have the person talking to themselves. And it really does tell you how there are different voices that you can talk in, and how different people have different wants and needs, but you're really trying to think of whatever you can say that will really resonate with someone, and something that your audience will hear and make them take action.
Right. Yes. Everybody, I feel like, has different personas based on who you are on Facebook versus who you are on Instagram, and
right.
who you are on a website. So definitely makes a difference.
Right. Definitely. It definitely changes. It shifts, and you need to also be very mindful of that. Usually there's a big picture strategy,
right?
But be mindful of what medium you're working in, and think about, like I said, I'd like to actually imagine a real person. Like, think of someone, if it's a guy, if it's my 14-year-old nephew, if I'm writing about candy or whatever it is, then it's like really imagine a real person and think about, what would I say to that actual person?
Right.
Because you're always ultimately writing to a human being. That's another thing to kind of think about. Sometimes we forget, I think, when you start typing away into your computer, like, that's a real person with real, they're a busy schedule.
Yes.
Is going to be getting this message. They might not be thinking about getting this message, or even want to get this message.
Right.
So you need to think, oh, this is a real person that I'm writing to.
Yes, definitely. So it kind of goes into our next point about messaging, and how would you recommend keeping your message consistent throughout your writing?
Right. And that kind of goes back to thinking about strategy, I think, to starting a couple of steps ahead. Before you actually start writing, think about what your strategy is, and what are the important, the unique selling points that you think your audience is going to be most interested in with your product or service. So you have strategy, and you have benefits, not only just the first benefits of whatever your product or service is, but the emotional end benefit of your product or service. So what are you offering, and then how is that going to ultimately benefit someone emotionally?
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
And I feel like it kind of ties hand in hand with like how your tone of voice should be.
Right. I mean, that's something that is really important too. I mean, empathy is huge, as you know, with any writing. But copywriting is, again, that's very important with your tone of voice. I also think clarity is super important. Yes. So a lot of times people get caught up in trying to be clever or catchy, but clarity is so important, and that is always something that I try to just go, if somebody's busy and they're not looking at this for very long, are they still going to understand what I'm trying to tell them? Being human is very important. Likable, keeping it easy and fun, usually, unless it's something that's a more serious topic like a medicine or something like that.
Right.
You have to think about your tone.
Yeah.
But a lot of times you can also customize your tone for the target audience to be more colloquial, and I think that's very important as well.
Yeah. There's a lot of like thought that you have to put ahead, especially with we were saying before that everybody's so busy.
Yes.
There's so much content out there.
Yes.
That you have to be mindful and strategic about, how you're going to approach writing your content.
Right. No, definitely. I was thinking about just messaging. Another example that of good advertising, good copywriting was for Google. Just their TV advertising. I don't know if you've seen that, but like you can Google it and find it online.
Yeah, right.
Because it's so good, and it's about technology, but it's ultimately about the emotional benefits of having search. So their campaign is a year in search 2018, and then their tagline is search on, and it's just about how empowering that feeling is. I mean, you see all these people having real important moments in their lives when they're searching something and then getting these great answers, and it really takes it to that next level. So it's not just about the technology, it's about the emotional benefit of the technology.
Right. It's a good form of storytelling on their end.
Exactly. And that's another very important part of copywriting, as you know.
Yes, and it's also another trend that we've been talking about a lot this year is that storytelling is, not that it's growing, it's here, but that brands are really harping on it and utilizing it to connect with their audiences.
Yeah, and another point that makes me think of when you're saying that is for storytelling is copywriters are usually working with synergistically with some kind of visual or something too. And think about how much of the story your visual is telling, and then try to work with your art director, your designer, and make those two things really tell a more powerful story than just working independently. Like if you have a beautiful picture of something that has a beautiful sunset, you don't need to say a beautiful sunset. You could say, put a tagline on it or something that complements the story rather than just says exactly what the visual is showing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you don't need to speak for your image, it kind of speaks for itself. So.
Like 1,000 words.
Yes, you need to complement it.
Right. It just makes it more powerful when it works like that, I think.
Exactly. So I guess kind of to go into our next topic, what would you recommend to brands that want to write a lot of content, want to keep up with their copywriting, but also want a strong ROI result?
Well, that is important to get that balance right, but there are so many. Well, first of all, I think it's important to identify your goals when you first start writing. Figure out who your audience is, figure out what your message is, figure out your tone of voice, figure out what you're trying to accomplish with this. Are you trying to just raise awareness? Are you trying to make a sale? But figure out what your goal is, and then you can figure out how to measure it. there's so many different ways to measure how content is working these days, whether it's analytics or just likes or just sales, your bottom line. But I think it's so important to stay mindful. I mean, and other members of your team will tell you if it's working or not as well. Yes. But if something's working, keep going down that path. But if it's not, be open to change.
Sure.
Be open to feedback of all kinds, and keep changing and learning until you get something that's really working, and then you're gonna have to keep changing it because it's changing.
Trends.
Yes, I have to keep learning constantly about your product and your audience, really. Right. The more you know about your product and the more you know about your audience, the better you're gonna be able to relay that information in a way that's most meaningful to them, I think.
For sure. Definitely agree with that. And just like to kind of wrap up, so Meredith is going to be writing a second blog post on copywriting, kind of advanced copywriting tips. So do you have a couple of thoughts that you want to share to tease the audience a little bit here?
Well, what I have been thinking about is really writing about mobile, which is so important, and voice search, microcopy, storytelling, getting into that a little bit more, SEO, and how you can naturally incorporate SEO into all kinds of copy.
Right.
But other things I was kind of thinking about were the differences between owned, earned, and paid media, and how those can all work together better.
Sure.
Because everything informs everything else, as you know, too. It's not like I'm just doing one thing and you're just doing one thing. All of our stuff is helping to advance the brand, hopefully. But I'm interested if there's any other thoughts that you have or anybody else might have out there.
Sure, and, if any of our audience, if you want to chime in and comment below on this video and tell Meredith what kind of copywriting techniques that you might be interested in learning more about, feel free to comment below and we'll answer your questions. And thanks, Meredith, for giving our audience a little bit of tips and insight on your copywriting.
Sure.
And thank you to our Facebook viewers for tuning in today. We keep up with our blog posts. We constantly are putting out new content, and we look forward to talking to you more next month in our Facebook Live. So thank you.
Thanks.